He was a millionaire who had everything, and she was the pregnant wife he cast aside with 4 chilling words: "Pack your things." He told her to be gone by morning, leaving her with nothing but a broken heart and the child growing inside her. But he never imagined his own mother would be the one to orchestrate his downfall. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of a hidden plan, a mother's secret, and a wife's incredible fight for redemption. What happens when a woman with nothing left to lose discovers a strength she never knew she had? Stay with us. The scent of money was something Ava never thought she'd get used to. It wasn't the crisp smell of new bills, but something more ambient and pervasive. It was the fragrance of expensive leather from the seats of the Bentley, the faint, clean aroma of the twice-weekly professional cleaning service that left their penthouse overlooking Central Park, sterile and gleaming, and the subtle, custom-blended perfume that clung to her husband, Landon Pierce. It was the smell of a life so far removed from her own upbringing in a quiet, tree-lined street in suburban Ohio that it often felt like a dream she was perpetually afraid of waking from. Their home was a testament to Landon's success. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living art installation, the lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. The furniture was minimalist, chosen by an interior designer whose name was whispered with reverence in magazines Ava now received, but rarely read. Every object had its place, every surface a mirror-like shine. It was beautiful, impeccable, and at times suffocatingly silent. It was Landon's world, and she was just his most prized acquisition. She met him at a charity gala she'd been working as a junior event planner. He had been a whirlwind of charm and intoxicating confidence, his tailored suit fitting him as perfectly as the easy smile on his handsome face. He'd pursued her with a single-minded intensity that was both flattering and overwhelming. He'd sent bouquets of rare, out-of-season peonies to her tiny walk-up apartment, whisked her away to Paris for a weekend on a private jet, and showered her with gifts that cost more than her yearly salary. He had painted a future for her so dazzling it had blinded her to the faint, almost invisible strings attached. Now, 2 years into their marriage, those strings had become gilded chains. Landon loved her, she believed, but he loved her in the way he loved his vintage Patek Philippe watch or his first edition copy of The Great Gatsby. She was an object of beauty to be displayed, maintained and controlled. Her opinions, once sought after with such performative interest, were now gently dismissed. Her career, which she had been so proud of, was deemed unnecessary. "Why would you want to work, my love?" he'd murmured one evening, his hand tracing the line of her jaw as they stood before the vast window. "You have everything you could ever need right here. I've given you the world." And she, lost in the intoxicating haze of his affection and the sheer luxury of it all, had agreed. She had traded her independence for security, her ambition for comfort. The trade had seemed worth it at first, but loneliness was a creeping vine, and it had slowly begun to wrap itself around her heart. His business, a sprawling tech empire he'd built from the ground up, consumed him. He was often gone, flying to Singapore, London, or Dubai, leaving her in the silent, echoing penthouse with only her thoughts for company. The news of her pregnancy had been a beacon of hope in her gilded cage. A baby. Their baby. It would be a piece of her in this world that was entirely his. It would fill the silence, give her purpose, and surely it would anchor Landon, tethering him to home in a way she alone could not. When she told him, his reaction was, like everything else about him, perfectly curated. He'd smiled, a brilliant, camera-ready flash of white teeth. He'd kissed her forehead and called her his clever, clever girl. He'd immediately called his mother, Margot, a formidable woman who resided in a sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. "Mother, you're going to be a grandmother," he'd announced, his voice booming with proprietary pride. Ava had felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. This was it. This was the moment their life would truly begin. The moment they would transform from a power couple in a magazine into a real family. But as the weeks turned into months, a subtle shift occurred. Landon's initial excitement morphed into a new form of control. He hired a nutritionist who provided Ava with a strict, joyless diet. He insisted she see a private obstetrician on the Upper East Side, a man with a clipped, dismissive tone who treated her questions as if they were childish interruptions. He vetoed her suggestions for nursery themes, instead hiring the same interior designer to create a space in muted, gender-neutral tones of grey and beige that felt more like a showroom than a child's room. "It's about giving our child the best, Ava," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Only the best. The baby, her baby, was already being branded with the Pierce family seal of excellence, another acquisition to be polished and perfected. The first real crack in the facade appeared during a dinner with some of his business associates. Ava, now 6 months pregnant, and feeling the gentle flutter of life inside her, had been recounting a humorous story about her own childhood, about building a ramshackle treehouse with her father. She had just reached the punchline when she noticed Landon's gaze. It was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of the affection he usually showed her in public. It was a look that said, "You are embarrassing me." He didn't say a word, but his fingers tightened ever so slightly on his wine glass. The message was as clear as if he'd shouted it across the table. She faltered, her story dying in her throat. The moment passed, the conversation moved on, but the chill of his disapproval lingered. Later that night, as she lay in their vast, empty bed, the silence of the penthouse pressed in on her. Landon was in the study, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur on a conference call. She placed a hand on her swelling belly, a protective, instinctive gesture. The baby kicked, a tiny, reassuring thump against her palm. A tear slid down her temple and into her hairline. She had everything a woman could ever want: a wealthy, handsome husband, a home that was the envy of millions, a child on the way. She was living a fairy tale. So why did she feel like a prisoner? The beautiful, panoramic view of the city from their window had never looked so much like the bars of a cage. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if the man she had married was her prince or her warden. The scent of money no longer smelled like success. It smelled like decay. The evening it all fell apart began, ironically, with a gift. Landon returned from a 3-day trip to Zurich and strode into the living room, a sleek, dark blue box from a famous jeweler in his hand. He was freshly shaven, his dark hair perfectly coiffed, and he wore a crisp white shirt that contrasted sharply with his tanned skin. He looked like the man from the magazines, the billionaire tech mogul, not the man who was about to shatter her world. "For you, my love," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. He opened the box to reveal a diamond necklace, a river of ice so brilliant it hurt to look at. It was ostentatious, impossibly expensive, and felt utterly wrong. "Landon, it's beautiful, but—" "Why?" Ava asked, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. She was 7 months along now, and her body felt heavy, unfamiliar. The baby was a constant, comforting presence, a secret conversation she had with the little life growing within her. "Because you're the mother of my child," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "And because we need to talk." The words, so innocuous on the surface, sent a jolt of pure dread through her. It was the tone, the flat, business-like cadence that he usually reserved for hostile negotiations. He gestured for her to sit on the white leather sofa, the one she'd always found beautiful, but profoundly uncomfortable. He remained standing, looming over her, a position of power he assumed so naturally she'd barely noticed it until now. "I've been thinking a great deal about our future," he began, pacing slowly in front of the vast window, the city lights a glittering, indifferent backdrop. "About what's best for the Pierce name, for my legacy." He spoke of his legacy as if it were a living, breathing entity, a demanding deity that required constant sacrifice. She had always been a part of that legacy, she thought. The beautiful, supportive wife. Now, the mother of his heir. "The thing is, Ava," he continued, turning to face her, his expression unreadable, "a legacy requires a certain image, a certain kind of strength and partnership. It needs to be flawless." He paused, letting the word hang in the air between them. Flawless, a word that had haunted their marriage, the flawless home, the flawless wardrobe, the flawless wife. "And I've come to the conclusion," he said, his voice dropping to a low, chillingly calm register, "that this isn't working." Ava's breath caught in her throat. The air in the room seemed to thin, the ambient hum of the city fading into a dull roar in her ears. What do you mean? This isn't working? The nursery, the birthing plan?" "Landon, I don't understand." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, not the nursery. Us, you and me." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face, a cold, creeping numbness spreading through her limbs. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare, a cruel, twisted joke. "You're my wife," she whispered, the words sounding fragile, desperate. "I'm pregnant with our child, and you will be well compensated for your contribution," he said, the phrase so cold, so transactional, it made her stomach churn. "I've had my lawyers draw up a severance package. It's very generous. You'll be comfortable for the rest of your life." Severance package? Contribution? He was talking about their marriage, their child, as if it were a failed business venture. She was being laid off from the position of Mrs. Landon Pierce. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. "Generous? Landon, I love you. This isn't about money. What did I do wrong?" Her voice cracked, the question a raw plea for an explanation, for anything that would make sense of the dizzying, terrifying reality crashing down on her. He sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated impatience, as if her emotional breakdown was a tedious inconvenience. "It's not about what you did, Ava. It's about what you are. You're nice. You're sweet. You're from a small town in Ohio. You were perfect for a time, a lovely chapter. But my life is moving in a different direction now. The circles I move in, the power I wield, it requires a different kind of woman by my side. Someone more formidable. Someone from my world." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was dissecting her, piece by piece, laying out all her perceived inadequacies as if they were facts in a prospectus. Her kindness, her gentleness, the very qualities he'd once claimed to adore, were now liabilities. "So that's it," she choked out, a wave of nausea rolling over her. "You're just throwing me away?" "I'm not throwing you away," he said, his voice softening into a tone of patronizing reason that was somehow worse than the cruelty. "I'm setting you free. You were never truly happy here, were you? In this world? You can go back to your simple life. You'll be a very wealthy woman. And as for the child," he added, his gaze flicking to her belly with a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. "Distaste, perhaps. My family will be involved. He or she will have the Pierce name and all the advantages that come with it. But they will not be raised by a woman who doesn't fit. The finality in his voice was a door slamming shut, the lock clicking into place. The hope she had clung to, the belief in their love, evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard vacuum of despair. This was not a negotiation. This was a verdict. She stared at him, the man she had loved, the father of her unborn child, and saw a stranger. The charming, attentive man she had married had been a performance, a carefully constructed illusion. This was the real Landon Pierce, ruthless, calculating, and utterly devoid of empathy. The power imbalance had never been subtle. It had been the entire foundation of their relationship. She had just been too blinded by the glittering facade to see it. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass, echoing in the cavernous silence. He took a sip, his back to her. "I'll have my driver take you wherever you want to go," he said, his voice muffled. "But I want you to pack your things. I want you to be gone by morning." The 4 words, delivered with such casual indifference, were the final, devastating blow. Pack your things, like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, like a temporary arrangement that had reached its end. For a long moment, Ava couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The diamond necklace lay in its velvet box on the table, a cold, glittering symbol of her dismissal. The baby kicked again, a frantic, insistent flutter, as if it could sense its mother's terror. That tiny, unseen life was the only thing that kept her from shattering completely. Slowly, shakily, she pushed herself up from the sofa. Her legs felt like lead. She looked around the perfect, sterile room, at the life that had been a lie. And then she looked at the stranger who was her husband. The tears had stopped. In their place was a chilling, terrifying clarity. The gilded cage had been sprung open, not to free her, but to cast her out into the wilderness. And she was utterly, completely alone. The drive out of Manhattan was a blur. The city lights, once a source of wonder, smeared past the window of the black town car like weeping wounds. Ava sat numbly in the plush leather seat, a single, hastily packed suitcase beside her. She had moved through the penthouse like a ghost, pulling clothes from the walk-in closet at random, her hands shaking so violently she could barely zip the bag. Landon had not come to say goodbye. He had remained in his study, the heavy oak door firmly closed, a silent, final dismissal. She hadn't known where to go. Her parents were gone, and her few friends in the city were his friends, people who orbited his star and would surely side with him. The thought of calling them, of having to explain the inexplicable, was unbearable. In a moment of pure, unthinking desperation, she had given the driver the only other address she knew, the one that had been drilled into her for holiday dinners and weekend visits, the address of Margot Pierce. It was a mad, illogical impulse. Why run to the mother of the man who had just destroyed her? Margot was a Pierce, cut from the same cloth of old money and steely resolve. She was formidable, with a sharp intelligence and a gaze that seemed to see right through the polite facades of society. Ava had always been slightly intimidated by her quiet, observant presence, and her impeccably tailored Chanel suits. Margot was everything Landon had said he wanted in a wife. Powerful, connected, from his world. Running to her was like a lamb seeking shelter in a lion's den. But as the car ate up the miles on the Merritt Parkway, a strange sense of calm began to settle over Ava's panic. Margot had always been different. While Landon's affection was performative and conditional, Margot's was reserved, almost clinical. Yet there had been moments of unexpected warmth, a knowing squeeze of her hand after Landon had made a particularly cutting remark, disguised as a joke, a quiet question about her family in Ohio, showing she'd actually listened and remembered. They were small, almost insignificant gestures, but they were the only scraps of genuine kindness Ava had received from the Pierce family. It was a foolish hope, a shot in the dark, but it was the only one she had. The car turned onto a private, tree-lined lane in Greenwich, Connecticut. The gates to the Pierce estate loomed ahead, imposing and wrought iron. The driver spoke into an intercom, and a moment later, the gates swung open with a silent, heavy grace. They swept up a long, gravel driveway, past manicured lawns and ancient oak trees, toward a grand, Tudor-style mansion that looked as if it had been standing for centuries. The front door opened before the car had even come to a complete stop. Margot Pierce stood silhouetted in the warm light of the foyer. She was a tall, elegant woman in her late 60s, her silver hair styled in a chic, timeless bob. She wore simple black trousers and a cream-colored cashmere sweater. She wasn't smiling. Ava stepped out of the car, her suitcase feeling impossibly heavy. The cool night air was a shock after the climate-controlled car. She felt small and exposed on the grand stone steps. "Ava," Margot said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, took in Ava's pale face, her tear-swollen eyes, and the single suitcase. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a deep, weary resignation. "I was wondering when you'd get here. Come inside." The interior of the house was the antithesis of Landon's penthouse. It was filled with history and warmth. Rich, dark wood paneling, shelves overflowing with books, and furniture that was old and comfortable, not stark and new. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace, casting a flickering golden glow over the room. It felt like a home, not a museum. Margot led her into a cozy sitting room and gestured to a deep, chintz armchair. "Sit, I'll have Mrs. Gable bring you some tea." Ava sank into the chair, the exhaustion of the last few hours washing over her in a debilitating wave. She felt a sob rise in her throat, and this time she couldn't stop it. The carefully constructed dam of her composure broke, and she began to cry. Deep, shuddering sobs of grief and fear and utter desolation. She expected a stiff, awkward pat on the shoulder, a platitude about keeping a stiff upper lip. Instead, Margot simply sat in the chair opposite her, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. She let Ava cry until the storm passed, leaving only hiccuping aftershocks. A moment later, a kind-faced housekeeper entered with a tray. Margot took the cup of steaming chamomile tea and handed it to Ava, her cool, steady fingers briefly touching Ava's trembling ones. "Drink this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Then you will tell me everything. Not what Landon told you to say. Not what you think I want to hear. The truth." And so, the story tumbled out. The cold, transactional dismissal. The cruel words about her not being formidable enough. The severance package. The chilling finality of, "Pack your things." She told Margot everything, her voice raw with pain. Throughout her account, Margot remained silent, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer excuses for her son. She simply listened, her blue eyes fixed on Ava's face, her focus absolute. It was the most anyone had truly listened to her in years. When Ava finished, her voice a hoarse whisper. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Ava braced herself for the verdict, for the inevitable defense of her son, the polite but firm suggestion that she take the generous offer and disappear quietly. But Margot did not defend her son. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her own tea, her eyes dark with a complex emotion Ava couldn't name. It looked like anger, but it was older, deeper than that. It was an ancient, settled fury. "My son," Margot said finally, her voice laced with a bitterness that startled Ava, is a brilliant businessman. He knows how to build things, how to acquire them, and how to assess their value. But he is a fool. He has always been a fool when it comes to people. He sees them as assets or liabilities on a balance sheet. He doesn't understand that a person's true worth can't be quantified. She looked at Ava, a flicker of something new in her eyes. It wasn't pity. It was respect. "He told you that you weren't formidable," Margot said, a wry, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "He has no idea what that word even means." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark, manicured gardens. "I have known my son his entire life. I have watched him build an empire. And I have watched him become a man I barely recognize. A man who would throw away his wife and his unborn child because they no longer fit his brand. This is not just an insult to you, Ava. It is an insult to this family. It is an insult to me." She turned back, her spine straight, her resolve like steel. The quiet, observant woman Ava had known was gone. In her place was a matriarch, a queen surveying her kingdom and finding it under threat from her own heir. "You will not be disappearing quietly," Margot stated, her voice ringing with an authority that Landon's power, based on money and fear, could never match. "You will not be taking his severance package. You came here tonight seeking shelter. But you're going to get much more than that." She paused, her gaze intense, her mind clearly working, piecing together a strategy with the same precision her son used to plan a corporate takeover. "He wants a formidable woman," Margot said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "Fine, we'll give him one. He told you to be gone by morning. He has no idea what the morning will bring. He has started a war, Ava, and he has made a grave miscalculation. He assumed I would be on his side." The guest room Margot led Ava to was a world away from the cold, minimalist bedroom in the penthouse. It was soft and welcoming, with floral wallpaper, a plush quilted bedspread, and a window seat that looked out over a sprawling English garden, currently sleeping under a blanket of darkness. For the first time in hours, Ava felt a flicker of safety, a fragile sense of reprieve from the storm. She slept fitfully, her dreams a chaotic reel of Landon's cold eyes and the echoing finality of his words. But when she woke, it was not to the sterile silence of the city, but to the gentle sound of bird song and the soft, grey light of dawn filtering through the curtains. The world had not ended. A new day had, impossibly, begun. Downstairs, the house was already humming with a quiet energy. The scent of coffee and baking bread filled the air. Margot was in the sunroom, a space filled with plants and wicker furniture, a stack of newspapers on the table beside her. She was dressed in a crisp blouse and slacks, already looking as though she were preparing for a board meeting, not a quiet morning at home. "Good morning, Ava," she said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "I hope you slept. We have a great deal to discuss." She gestured to the seat opposite her, where a place had been set. As Ava sat, Margot pushed a file folder across the table. It was thin, beige, and unmarked. "Landon believes the world revolves around his company, Pierce International," Margot began, forgoing any small talk. "In a way, he's right. His identity, his power, his ego, it's all tied up in that one entity. He sees you as a disposable accessory to that life. What he has forgotten is that I was his first investor." Ava looked at her confused. "Not just with money," Margot clarified. "I gave him his seed capital, yes, but I also gave him his first contacts. I introduced him to the people who would become the bedrock of his success. I taught him how to navigate the world he now claims as his own. He thinks he built his empire from scratch. He conveniently forgets that I provided the land, the tools, and the blueprint." She tapped the folder. Landon is a creature of habit and arrogance. He believes he is untouchable, that his control is absolute. That is his weakness. Our plan will not be a messy, public divorce battle. That is what he would expect. It would be fought on his terms, in the tabloids and courtrooms where his money gives him the advantage. No. We will fight him on a different battlefield. We will fight him from within. Ava opened the folder. Inside was a single document, a shareholder proxy statement for Pierce International. Her own name was listed, holding a small but not insignificant number of shares. It was a wedding gift from Margot, something Landon had dismissed as a sweet, maternal gesture. He had handled all their finances, and Ava had never given it a second thought. Those shares are your entry point, Margot explained, but they are not your weapon. They are merely your key to the building. Our true weapon is knowledge. For the next hour, Margot laid out the foundations of her plan. It was not a simple scheme for revenge. It was a masterclass in corporate strategy, delivered with the cold precision of a seasoned general. Margot, Ava realized, was not just a society matron. She was a brilliant, strategic mind who had been watching, listening, and waiting. Landon's greatest strength is his public image, Margot said, her eyes alight with a fierce intelligence. He is the visionary, the innovator, the self-made man. We are going to dismantle that image, piece by piece, not with accusations, but with facts. We will not attack him. We will expose him. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was information gathering. Margot had a name, a man named Graham Westcott, a senior vice president at Pierce International. Graham is a good man, Margot said. He's been with the company since the beginning. He's loyal, but his loyalty is to the company, to the dream we all once had, not to the man Landon has become. He is nearing retirement, and he has become disillusioned. He sees the rot beneath the surface. He will be our eyes and ears. Phase 2 was building alliances. You are not the only person Landon has cast aside, Margot explained. He leaves a trail of burned bridges and broken promises. There are former employees, early partners, people he has wronged. They are afraid of him, of his power to ruin them. But people who are afraid can also be motivated by a common cause. You will be that cause. Ava's role, Margot explained, was not to be a victim. It was to be a symbol. The pregnant wife, discarded and underestimated. She would be the face of their quiet rebellion. Phase 3 was the end game. It was a move so audacious, so daring, that it took Ava's breath away. It involved leveraging a little-known clause in the company's bylaws, a clause Margot herself had insisted upon years ago, designed to protect the company from a rogue CEO. It was a failsafe, a hidden lever of power that Landon, in his arrogance, had long since forgotten. He is planning to merge with a rival tech firm, a massive, multi-billion-dollar deal, Margot said, her voice low and intense. It is his magnum opus, the deal that will cement his legacy. He has told the board it is a merger of equals. It is not. It is a takeover. He is selling off key assets, laying off foundational employees, and hollowing out the company he built, all for the sake of his own ego. He is selling its soul. And we are going to stop him. Ava stared at the woman across from her, her mind reeling. This was not just a plan for revenge. It was a coup. Margot was not just trying to help her. She was trying to save the soul of the company she had helped create. Her motives were not purely altruistic. They were deeply personal, rooted in a complex mix of maternal disappointment, protective instinct, and a fierce, unyielding pride. She was fighting for Ava, yes, but she was also fighting for her own legacy, a legacy Landon was in the process of destroying. "Why?" Ava asked, the question a whisper. "Why are you doing this for me?" Margot looked away, her gaze softening as she watched a small bird land on a branch outside the window. "When I was a young woman, my own husband, Landon's father, was a powerful man, and a difficult one. He made mistakes, and I stood by, silent and supportive, because that is what was expected of me. I thought I was being strong, but I was being complicit. I will not make that mistake again. No woman should be made to feel powerless by a man, especially not a man from my family." She turned back to Ava, her eyes locking with hers. "He underestimated you, Ava. He thinks you are weak, and frankly, you have allowed him to think that. That changes today. The next few weeks will be the most difficult of your life. You will have to find a strength you didn't know you possessed. You will have to become the woman he accused you of not being. Can you do that?" Ava looked down at her hands, then placed one on her belly. A tiny life was depending on her. She thought of Landon's cold, dismissive face, of the years she had spent shrinking herself to fit into his world. She thought of the quiet desperation of her gilded cage. Margot was offering her not just a way out, but a way up. It was terrifying. It was fraught with risk, but it was also a lifeline. She lifted her chin, her gaze meeting Margot's. For the first time since that horrible night, the fear was replaced by something else. A spark, a flicker of defiance, a nascent, unfamiliar power. "Yes," Ava said, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, I can." A slow smile spread across Margot's face. It was the smile of an architect, seeing her plans finally taking shape. "Good," she said. "Then let's get to work." The following weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings and whispered phone calls. The quiet, comfortable mansion in Greenwich transformed into a war room, and Ava, under Margot's tutelage, began a transformation of her own. She was no longer just a victim. She was a student, and her education was in the art of power. Her first lesson was with Graham Westcott. Margot arranged a meeting at a discreet tea room in a nearby town. Graham was a kind-faced man with weary eyes and a gentle demeanor, the antithesis of Landon's sharp, predatory energy. He was nervous at first, his hands trembling slightly as he stirred his tea. "I love that company," he told Ava, his voice thick with emotion. "I was there when it was just 3 of us in a rented office space. We believed we were changing the world. Now it's just about share prices and hostile takeovers. Landon has lost his way." Ava, coached by Margot, didn't press him for secrets. Instead, she listened. She asked him about the early days, about his family. She spoke of her own hopes for her child, for a future where integrity mattered more than profit. She wasn't acting. She was speaking from the heart, but it was a truth she had long suppressed. She was connecting with him, not as a corporate spy, but as a fellow human being who had been disillusioned by the same man. By the end of their meeting, Graham's nervousness had been replaced by a quiet resolve. "Margot was right about you," he said, looking at her with newfound respect. "You're not what I expected." He slid a plain manila envelope across the table. "These are internal projections for the merger. They show the projected layoffs. It's worse than anyone knows. Use them well." That small victory was a turning point for Ava. She had not manipulated Graham. She had earned his trust. It was a form of power she had never known, a power rooted in empathy and genuine connection, not fear and intimidation. It felt clean. It felt right. Her days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings were spent with Margot, poring over company reports and financial statements that once would have been indecipherable. Margot was a patient teacher, breaking down complex jargon, explaining the subtle language of corporate finance, and pointing out the vulnerabilities hidden within the numbers. Ava's mind, long dormant, felt sharp and alive. She was discovering an aptitude for strategy she never knew she possessed. Afternoons were for outreach. Guided by Margot and the information from Graham, Ava began to contact other people from Landon's past. A brilliant software developer he had pushed out of the company to take sole credit for a groundbreaking algorithm. A former marketing director he had fired for questioning his unethical advertising strategies. Each conversation was a delicate dance. She approached them not with anger or a thirst for revenge, but with a quiet, dignified strength. She shared her story, but more importantly, she listened to theirs. She became a repository for their quiet resentments, their forgotten ambitions, their shared sense of betrayal. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all of them. The psychological conflict was immense. Part of her, the old Ava, was horrified by what she was doing. It felt deceptive, calculating. She was using people's pain to fuel a corporate coup. But another part of her, the woman being forged in the fires of Margot's war room, knew it was necessary. Landon had built his empire on the backs of these people. Giving them a voice, a chance to reclaim their dignity, was not deception. It was justice. Her most difficult challenge was a woman named Sloane Carrington, a venture capitalist who had been one of Landon's earliest and most vocal champions. She was sharp, cynical, and had a reputation for suffering no fools. Landon had unceremoniously cut her out of a lucrative deal years ago, but she had never spoken of it publicly. "Let me guess," Sloane said, her voice dripping with sarcasm over the phone. "The little wife got dumped, and now she wants to cry on my shoulder and get me to fight her battles. Not interested." Ava's heart sank, but Margot had prepared her for this. "I'm not asking you to fight my battles, Miss Carrington," Ava said, her voice steady, echoing the confidence Margot had instilled in her. "I'm offering you an opportunity to correct a market inefficiency. Landon Pierce's leadership has become a liability to the company you once invested in. His arrogance is about to cost the shareholders billions. I have the data to prove it. I thought that might be of interest to you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Ava could almost hear the gears turning in Sloane's mind. She had appealed not to her emotions, but to her legendary business acumen. "Send me what you have," Sloane said finally, her tone shifting from dismissive to intrigued. "No promises, but I'll look." It was a monumental win. Sloane Carrington's support would lend their cause an unimpeachable credibility. As the weeks passed, Ava felt herself changing, evolving. Her posture was straighter, her voice more confident. The fear that had once consumed her was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. She was no longer Landon Pierce's discarded wife. She was a leader, a strategist, the quiet, unassuming center of a growing rebellion. One evening, as she and Margot were going over the final preparations for their endgame, Ava paused, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. The baby kicked, a strong, steady rhythm. "I'm scared, Margot," she admitted, her voice low. "Not for me, but for him, or her. What kind of world am I bringing this child into? What kind of mother am I becoming?" Margot looked at her, her expression softening. She reached across the table and placed her hand over Ava's. "You are becoming the kind of mother your child will be proud of," she said gently. "You are showing them that you do not have to accept the world as it is handed to you. You are showing them that true strength isn't about being loud or ruthless. It's about having the courage to stand up for what is right, even when you are afraid. You are not just fighting a man, Ava. You are fighting for a better future for your child. And there is no more formidable act than that. In that moment, Ava understood the true depth of Margot's motives. This was her redemption, too. Through Ava, Margot was rewriting her own past, rectifying the silence she had regretted for so long. They were 2 generations of women, bound by the failures of the same man, now united in a quest to redefine their own legacies. The final piece of the plan was the annual shareholder meeting, just days away. It was where Landon intended to announce the merger, his moment of ultimate triumph. It was also where their quiet, carefully orchestrated coup would finally come to light. Ava was no longer just a pawn in Margot's game. She was a queen, forged and ready for the final, decisive move. The day of the Pierce International annual shareholder meeting was grey and overcast, the sky threatening a storm that mirrored the tempest brewing inside the company's gleaming headquarters. The main conference hall was a sea of dark suits and hushed, expectant murmurs. Landon Pierce stood at the podium, a portrait of success and unshakable confidence. He scanned the crowd, his smile broad and charismatic, completely unaware that his kingdom was about to be besieged from within. Ava and Margot arrived not with a dramatic entrance, but with a quiet, deliberate calm. They took their seats not in the front row, but in the middle of the pack, 2 unassuming women in a room full of power players. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression serene, her hands resting protectively on her belly. She could feel Margot's steadying presence beside her, a silent anchor of resolve. Landon began his address, his voice resonating with practiced ease. He spoke of record profits, of innovation, of a future that was brighter than ever. He was a master showman, weaving a narrative of triumph that had the board members and investors nodding in approval. Ava felt a pang of the old awe she used to have for him, for his ability to command a room, to bend reality to his will. But now she could see the artifice, the hollow core beneath the polished veneer. Finally, he arrived at the climax of his speech, the announcement of the merger with Titan Dynamics. "This isn't just a merger," he declared, his voice booming with pride. "This is a revolution, the dawn of a new era for Pierce International, cementing our place as the undisputed leader in the global tech landscape for decades to come." A wave of enthusiastic applause swept through the room. Landon beamed, soaking in the adoration. This was his coronation. He motioned for the formal vote, a procedural necessity. The outcome was a foregone conclusion. And then a single hand went up. It was Sloane Carrington. She stood, a sharp, commanding figure in a tailored red suit. All eyes turned to her. A confused silence fell over the room. "Before we vote," Sloane said, her voice cutting through the silence like glass, "I believe there is some information that the shareholders have not been made privy to. Information that pertains directly to the value and long-term stability of this company." Landon's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Sloane, I assure you, all relevant materials have been distributed." "Have they?" Sloane interrupted, her tone icy. She gestured to the back of the room. The doors opened, and Graham Westcott walked in, followed by 2 other senior employees Ava had spoken to. They began to distribute a slim, professionally printed report to every shareholder. On the cover, in bold, simple letters, were the words, "A report on the true cost of the Titan Dynamics merger." Landon's face went pale. He stared at Graham, his eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning, furious betrayal. "Graham? What is the meaning of this?" "It means the truth is finally coming out, Landon," Graham said, his voice shaking but clear. The report was a devastating, factual dismantling of Landon's narrative. It contained Graham's internal projections, showing that the merger would result in the termination of over 30% of the company's workforce. It included detailed analyses of the key assets being sold off at a fraction of their value. It laid bare the truth that this was not a merger, but a leveraged buyout that would leave Pierce International a hollowed-out shell, while personally enriching Landon and a small circle of his cronies. A panicked murmur rippled through the crowd as shareholders frantically flipped through the pages. The atmosphere of celebration had evaporated, replaced by one of shock and dawning anger. But Margot wasn't finished. She stood up, her movements slow and graceful. The room fell silent. When the matriarch of the Pierce family stood to speak, everyone listened. "My son is a visionary," she began, her voice calm and measured, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "But a vision without a soul is a nightmare. He has spoken to you of legacy. But a legacy is not built by dismantling the very foundation you stand on. It is not built on the backs of the loyal employees who have dedicated their lives to this company." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the board members. "There is a clause in the company bylaws, Section 12B, a clause I insisted upon at its founding. It states that any merger or acquisition that results in a fundamental change to the company's core structure requires not just a simple majority, but a 2/3 approval from the shareholders and the unanimous consent of the founding board." She turned her gaze directly on Landon. It was not the look of a mother, but of a judge delivering a sentence. "I was a member of the founding board, and I do not consent." It was a checkmate, a move so brilliant, so unexpected that the entire room seemed to gasp as one. Landon stared at his mother, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. He had been so focused on the enemies in front of him that he had never once considered the possibility of a betrayal from behind, from his own blood. And then Ava stood up. This was her moment, the one Margot had prepared her for. She didn't speak of her personal pain, of her broken heart. She spoke as a shareholder, as the mother of a future Pierce, as a woman who had been given a voice. "I am Ava Sinclair," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a power she never knew she possessed. "I am not a businesswoman, but I am a human being, and I have spoken to the people this report talks about, the developers, the marketers, the administrative staff, the people who are the true heart of this company. A company's worth is not just in its stock price. It is in its people. It is in its integrity. And under its current leadership, this company has lost its way." She looked directly at Landon, her gaze unwavering. There was no anger in her eyes, only a profound, heartbreaking sadness. "You told me I wasn't formidable enough. But being formidable isn't about being ruthless. It's about having the strength to do the right thing, especially when it's hard. And what you are doing, Landon, is not just wrong. It is weak." The word hung in the air. Weak. The ultimate insult to a man like Landon Pierce. He looked from his mother to his wife, to the sea of accusing faces around him. He saw his allies shifting their gazes, his supporters suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. The power he had wielded, the fear he had cultivated, had vanished in an instant, exposed as a fragile house of cards. His empire, his legacy, his very identity had crumbled around him, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, undeniable truths. The revolution had been televised, and he was on the losing side. He was utterly, completely, and publicly defeated. The fallout from the shareholder meeting was swift and brutal. The Titan Dynamics deal collapsed spectacularly. The board, facing a shareholder revolt and a PR nightmare, demanded Landon's immediate resignation. His face, once a symbol of arrogant success on the covers of business magazines, was now the subject of scathing articles detailing his hubris and downfall. He had lost everything he valued: his company, his power, his reputation. He was a king without a kingdom. A week later, Ava was in the garden at the Greenwich estate, sitting on a stone bench surrounded by late-blooming roses. The autumn air was crisp and clean. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible, a quiet that wasn't empty, but full of promise. The war was over. She heard footsteps on the gravel path and looked up to see Margot approaching, carrying a small, ornate wooden box. "This is for you," Margot said, sitting beside her. Or rather, for the baby. Ava opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a simple, elegant silver rattle. It was old, tarnished with age, and clearly cherished. "It was Landon's," Margot said softly, "and his father's before him. It is a family heirloom, from a time when the Pierce name stood for something more than just money." Ava looked at her, her heart full. "Margot, I can never thank you enough." Margot smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her usually stern features. "You don't have to thank me, Ava. We saved each other. You gave me the courage to finally do what I should have done years ago. And I hope, showed you the woman you were always meant to be." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car on the driveway. It was Landon. He got out of the car, looking smaller, diminished. He had lost weight, and the expensive suit he wore seemed to hang off his frame. He approached them hesitantly, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a raw, unfamiliar vulnerability. "Mother," he said, his voice hoarse. He couldn't bring himself to look at Ava. "Landon," Margot replied, her tone neutral. I came to talk," he stammered, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, about everything." He finally lifted his head and looked at Ava. The anger was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, hollowed-out confusion. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time. "You were right," he said, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "What you said at the meeting, it was weak. I built an empire, but I destroyed everything that mattered. I was so afraid of losing control, of not being the most powerful man in the room, that I became a monster." He took a hesitant step closer. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Ava. I don't deserve it. But I want to be a father to our child. A real father. If you'll let me, I'm going to get help. I need to figure out who I am without all of that." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire world he had lost. Ava looked at the broken man before her. The desire for revenge, the anger, had long since faded, replaced by a profound sense of sadness for the man he could have been. Forgiveness was a complex, messy thing. It wasn't a switch she could flip, but she saw for the first time a flicker of the man she had once loved, buried deep beneath layers of ego and ambition. "Redemption isn't a single act, Landon," she said softly, her voice her own, strong and sure. "It's a long road, and it's a road you have to walk on your own. You can be a part of our child's life, but you will have to earn it. Not with gifts or promises, but with actions, with time." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He understood. It was not the answer he wanted, but it was the one he needed. He looked at his mother, a silent question in his eyes. "The company is in good hands," Margot said, answering his unspoken question. "Graham is the interim CEO. He's bringing back the old team. They're rebuilding. Perhaps one day there will be a place for you there again. But not as a king, as a worker. You have to start from the beginning, Landon, and learn what it truly means to build something that lasts. He stayed for a few more minutes, the conversation stilted and awkward, yet holding the first, fragile threads of a new beginning. When he left, the three of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. The old power structures had been shattered, the betrayals laid bare. As his car disappeared down the driveway, Ava turned to Margot. "What now?" Margot looked out at the garden, a serene expression on her face. "Now we live. You prepare to be a mother. I prepare to be a grandmother. And as for the company, Sloane Carrington has asked me to take a permanent seat on the board. She said they needed someone formidable." She looked at Ava, a twinkle in her eye. I told her I knew just the woman for the job, but that she was currently busy building a legacy of her own. Ava laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep within. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of her child. The future was uncertain, a blank page waiting to be written. But for the first time in a very long time, she was not afraid. She was the architect of her own life now, and she was ready to build. This story shows that the deepest betrayals can sometimes come from those we love the most, but it also shows the incredible power of redemption and the unexpected strength we can find within ourselves. The journey of Ava, Landon, and Margot is a reminder that true power isn't about wealth or control, but about integrity, courage, and the willingness to fight for what is right. If this story of a wife's incredible stand and a mother's secret plan moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a powerful story of justice and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next video. We want to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. What part of Ava's journey resonated with you the most? Thanks for watching.